We're going to be doing a very serious and I think necessary analysis today of the 2014 Isla Vista killings.
Right.
It's an event that really stands as a grim example of how, you know, certain ideologies and personal grievances can escalate into just horrific
It
violence.
really is. And our purpose here is to go beyond the sort of surface level headlines. We're going to structure what we know from the source material, from the official records, the research, to really understand the timeline.
Yeah, the chronology of the events, the psychological background of the individual responsible, and well, the ideological forces that were at play.
And it's so important that we approach this with the seriousness and impartiality it demands.
Hmm.
We're examining the actions and the background of Elliot Oliver Robertson Rodger. He was 22 years old when this happened on May 23rd, 2014.
Near the University of California, Santa Barbara, UCSB.
Exactly. And really trying to understand that path to radicalization is, I think, our main goal here.
The outcome of that day was it was devastating. 6 people lost their lives and 14 others were injured. And the sources are very clear on this. This is classified as misogynist terrorism. It's rooted in this desire for revenge for what he perceived as social and sexual rejection.
And that was all framed by, this very toxic ideology that's come to be known as incel ideology.
Right. And before we really get into the specifics of his life and his planning, we just need to take a moment to acknowledge the victims.
Absolutely. The impact was profound and devastating. We want to express our deepest sympathies to the families and friends of the 6 people who were killed.
Veronica Weiss, Catherine Cooper, Christopher Michaels Martinez, Weihan Wang, Cheng Yuan Hong, and George Chen.
And also to the 14 people who were injured. Their lives, and really the lives of that entire community, were just changed forever by this senseless violence.
So to really understand this, we have to start at the beginning, with Rodger's early years. The sources paint a very detailed picture of his childhood, and one of the first things that stands out is, well, it was a life of privilege.
It really was. That's a key part of the story. He was born in London back in 1991. His family was quite successful, especially in the film and creative industries.
His father is Peter Rodger, a British filmmaker. He worked as a second unit director on some pretty big films like The Hunger Games.
That's right. And the family history is even more notable than that. His paternal grandfather was George Rodger.
The famous photojournalist.
The very same. A founding member of Magnum Photos, known for his incredibly powerful and harrowing images from the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp.
So there's a legacy there of high achievement, of being in the public eye.
Definitely. And his mother, Ongli Chintai, she was of Malaysian Chinese descent and also worked in the film industry. They had a very affluent life, first in West Sussex in England, and then they moved to California when Elliot was about 5.
To Woodland Hills, a pretty wealthy part of Los Angeles.
But that family unit didn't stay intact for long. His parents divorced when he was 7. He and his younger sister would split their time, weekdays with their mother, weekends with their father.
And it seems like this period, right around the divorce, is when the first signs of his behavioral and psychological struggles really started to surface.
Yeah, the sources detail some very specific issues that go, way beyond just being a shy kid. At school, in elementary school, he was described as intensely quiet, very withdrawn.
He had trouble with speech, right? I read that he often preferred to write things down instead of saying them out loud.
He did. And that anxiety showed up in other ways. He had these very specific coping mechanisms, like he'd avoid other kids and engage in these repetitive behaviors.
Things like making specific noises or foot tapping, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Self-soothing behaviors. His social anxiety was, it was acute. The source material talks about an incident at Disneyland where the crowds and the noise just completely overwhelmed him. He broke down in tears.
Wow. So he found any kind of social unpredictability just impossible to deal with.
Profoundly difficult. And this led to some early attempts to figure out what was going on. In a 1999 child support affidavit, his mother actually referred to him as a high-functioning autistic child.
But that wasn't the final word on it.
No, it wasn't universally accepted. His father later brought in a doctor who disputed that diagnosis, suggesting that maybe the first examiner had overlooked other things, like severe depression or anxiety.
So there was some friction, some disagreement even then about how to best help him.
There was. But a formal diagnosis did come eventually. When he was 15 in 2007, he was diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. PDD-NOS,
It's probably worth explaining what that means because that term isn't really used anymore. It's been folded into the broader diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder.
Right. PDD-NOS was essentially the diagnosis you'd get if you showed many of the signs of an autism spectrum disorder, especially the big challenges with social communication and interaction, the repetitive behaviors. But you didn't quite meet all the criteria for, say, classic autism or Asperger's.
So it signifies a real neurodevelopmental challenge, something that makes social functioning and emotional regulation incredibly difficult.
Especially under stress, yes.
And that diagnosis was important because it gave him access to resources, right? Special education, therapy sessions. There was a framework for intervention there.
There was a framework he would later reject, but at the time, yes. But, alongside this formal diagnosis, you can see him wrestling with these intense identity issues that just fueled his isolation.
He became very self-conscious about his appearance.
Extremely. Especially his height. He was short, and his slender build. The sources say he even tried to play basketball, hoping it would literally make him taller.
And his mixed race heritage was another major factor for him, wasn't it? He felt like he didn't fit in with his peers in Los Angeles, who were mostly white and affluent.
He felt like a complete outsider. And he tried to cope with that by trying to change who he was. At just 9 years old, he dyed his hair blonde.
A direct attempt to just blend in.
An attempt to blend in, to conform. He took up things like skateboarding. It all points to this really intense early desperation for acceptance, to belong to this social group that he idolized.
And this is where that struggle for acceptance, combined with some really traumatic experiences, starts to form the basis of his later misogyny. He was bullied severely. This was in middle school and high school at Crespi Carmelite High School, which is an all-boys Catholic school. The abuse he suffered was both physical and homophobic.
And that's a really critical point to synthesize. The experience of homophobic abuse, the fear of not being seen as masculine, that can create this profound insecurity. For him, it seems to have metastasized into this deep-seated hatred.
A hatred that he projected outwards.
Exactly. Outwards against women who he started to see as these gatekeepers of social and sexual validation, and also against other men who he saw as his competition, as people who had the masculine traits he felt he lacked.
And the sources note one specific story he told, though you have to see it as part of his own narrative, his own justification.
Right.
He claimed that being bullied by a particular blonde girl was what directly caused his misogynistic views to develop.
And whether that one girl was the sole cause is, almost beside the point. What it shows you is his cognitive distortion. His mind immediately took any rejection, any perceived injustice, and filtered it through this lens of gender warfare.
So that belief that his suffering was the fault of women, of their wickedness, that became the engine for everything else.
It became the central toxic driver. That's the moment his internal struggle was fully externalized into an ideology of hate. So as he moves out of adolescence, you see this dramatic escalation, the isolation, the rage, it all gets worse. And a big reason for that is he just walks away from any kind of professional help.
Right. By 18, he's done. He refuses to take any prescribed medication, stops going to therapy. He's essentially trying to manage these severe symptoms of PDD, and anxiety all on his own.
And his life just immediately starts to fall apart. He tries college, Los Angeles Pierce College, then Moore Park College, and fails quickly.
And it wasn't because the classes were too hard?
Not at all. It was because just being on campus, seeing happy couples walking around, triggered such intense feelings of anger and envy and inadequacy that he literally couldn't function there. The sight of normal social life was a direct attack on him in his mind.
And that led to this sense of entitlement, which got wrapped up in a new obsession, money.
A huge fixation on money. He became convinced that wealth was the only thing that could solve his problems, the only way he could attract women. He started blaming his parents for his failures.
Blaming his mother for not marrying a richer man.
Yes, and he really resented his father after one of his films, oh my God, didn't do well at the box office. Rodger believed that this financial failure hurt the family's finances, which impacted his allowance, and he saw it as another way the world was depriving him of what he was owed.
But he didn't try to, get a job or build a career. He was looking for shortcuts.
Always shortcuts. The sources talk about his attempts at get-rich-quick schemes. He tried screenwriting, inventing things, but he'd abandon them as soon as they required any real sustained effort.
And the most telling example of this was his obsession with the lottery.
Oh, absolutely. It's a clear indicator of his delusional thinking. He had saved up about $5,000, money he'd later use for the attack, but he was also spending huge amounts on lottery tickets.
He drove to Arizona 4 times just to buy Powerball tickets.
4 times. For a $500 million jackpot, he genuinely believed that fate, that the universe, owed him this massive win to fix all of his romantic problems.
And while this is going on, his internal rage is turning into these incredibly disturbing, violent fantasies.
Fantasies he started sharing. He had thoughts about killing couples, imagining himself stabbing them to death while they were having sex.
And when he told his few friends about this, they, not surprisingly, started to back away.
Which just deepened his isolation even further. And then that internal rage started to bleed out into the real world. Starting around 2011, 2012, we see these incidents of petty public aggression.
He would actively go out and harass couples. It wasn't just him stewing in his room anymore.
No, he was taking action. Throwing coffee on them, splashing them with iced tea, and most bizarrely, he bought a Super Soaker water gun and used it to spray orange juice on college students in a park.
Specifically targeting blonde women who were with men.
Yes. That shift from just having fantasies to taking aggressive, even if it wasn't lethal, action. That's a terrifying milestone on this timeline. He's testing boundaries.
Which brings us to a huge tipping point. The house party incident in July of 2013.
Right. He was about to turn 22, and he had this self-imposed deadline to lose his virginity. He drank some vodka to lower his inhibitions and went to a party.
And the whole thing started because of his entitlement. He saw a blonde woman talking to an Asian man. And for him, with his racist and misogynistic views, that was a huge trigger. He deliberately bumped into the man to provoke him.
And when his own attempts to talk to women failed, he just boiled over. He climbed up on a 10-foot ledge and started mocking people, pretending to shoot them with his finger.
And then he tried to physically shove some women off the ledge.
That's when a group of men stepped in. They pushed him off, and he fell and fractured his ankle.
Okay, and this is where you really see his manipulation and his distorted thinking in action. From the hospital, where he's being treated for his broken ankle, he files a police report.
And he completely fabricates the story. He claims he was the victim, that he was pushed off the ledge and then assaulted by 10 men for no reason, just because someone called him a homophobic slur.
But the police investigated.
They did, and the witnesses all told a different story. They confirmed Rodger was the instigator, that his behavior was bizarre and aggressive. The deputies closed the case, noting in their report that he was being dishonest.
But crucially, he was never arrested. He was never charged with anything. The escalation just continued.
It did. And at the same time, you have his family, who are just in crisis mode, desperately trying to find some kind of help that will work. They consulted a psychiatrist, Charles Sophie.
He prescribed an antipsychotic risperidone,
which Rodger immediately went online, researched, and then refused to take. He decided it wasn't right for him.
They also brought in a filmmaker and relationship expert, Dale Launer.
Yeah, trying a non-traditional approach, hoping something would get through to him, but he dismissed that as well.
Yeah.
His mother also hired an agency that provided counselors.
And he did attend those sessions, right? For about a year.
He attended 29 sessions. But the sources show how difficult they were. He sort of connected with the male counselors, but he'd get intensely jealous if he thought they had social lives outside of their sessions.
And his misogyny came right to the surface.
Immediately. He insulted a female counselor after she gently suggested that maybe paid female companionship could help with his social isolation.
And one of these professionals, a life coach named Gavin Linderman, suggested what seems like a really crucial intervention.
He did. He said Rodger needed to get out of Isla Vista, that the environment itself was just fuel for the fire, making his mental state worse.
And this is just, it's a heartbreaking point in the story. Rodger just refused.
He dismissed the idea completely. And this is where his parents were really trapped by the legal reality of the situation. They were terrified. They knew something was deeply wrong, but he was an adult.
So his mother couldn't legally force him to move or get involuntary treatment?
She couldn't. Therapists advised her that she had no legal standing. And he was manipulative. He promised her he'd focus on school and counseling if she just kept paying his rent.
And the therapists, who were bound by privacy laws for adults, they couldn't declare him an imminent threat, so they advised her to keep supporting him financially.
It's just a systemic failure.
Yeah.
You have all this evidence of distress, of escalating aggression, but the system in place couldn't intervene. It underscores this huge challenge in dealing with adults who are on a path to violence.
So with his life kind of spiraling, Rodger starts to channel all of this rage into into a coherent ideology. He documents it all in this 137-page manifesto he called My Twisted World.
Right. And that document is what really establishes the motive here as premeditated misogynist terrorism. There's no ambiguity.
The thing that's so terrifying about it is not just the content, but how organized it is. It's almost like that trait from his PDD-nose diagnosis, that intense, structured focus, was now being applied to pure hatred.
Absolutely. He details his entire life story, but it's all framed through this one single obsession. The fact that he was a lifelong virgin and how the world, and women in particular, had failed to give him the status he felt he was owed.
The misogyny is just. It's laid bare. He calls women a plague. He argues that their right to choose their own partners was, and this is a quote, something that could hinder the advancement of humanity.
He believed that civilized men of intelligence, meaning himself, should be the ones to choose women's sexual partners.
He goes on to demand that women should be denied basic rights, that their wickedness needed to be contained.
And he explicitly frames his own suffering as their fault. He declared their collective rejection of him to be a declaration of war, and that was his justification for a violent response.
And you can see, reading it, this wasn't just him venting his anger. In his mind, this was a revolutionary text. He hoped his attacks would spark a social upheaval.
A total reshaping of humanity. His vision for this new world order is detailed with, chilling specificity.
It's grotesque. He wrote about leading fanatically loyal troops, presumably other incels, to round up all women and put them in concentration camps.
A few who are kept alive would be in secret labs for artificial insemination, just to keep the species going. But men would be kept totally unaware that women even existed to protect them from the plague.
It's just pure dystopian fantasy. And this fantasy coalesced into a very real operational plan, which he called his Day of Retribution.
It was meticulously planned out in 3 phases. He actually postponed it several times. First Halloween, then Valentine's Day, then an event called Deltopia because he was worried about there being too many police around.
And the plan shows zero regard for anyone, including his own family. Phase 0, the prep phase, involved driving to his father's house,
where he planned to kill his stepmother and his younger half-brother. He was afraid his half-brother would grow up to be more successful socially than he was. He planned to stab his stepmother and then steal their Mercedes SUV for the rampage.
Then phase 1 was focused on his own apartment. He was going to kill his 2 roommates first.
He saw them as obstacles, and he was annoyed by their normal social lives. Then his plan was to lure other victims to the apartment to torture and kill them.
And phase 2 was what he called the war on women, the centerpiece of his whole plan.
Right. The target was the Alpha Phi sorority house. He wanted to kill the girls who, in his words, represented everything I hate in the female gender, kill as many as he could, and then set the building on fire.
The final stage, phase 3, was the public rampage. He'd use the stolen SUV to just drive around Isla Vista, shooting and running over as many people as possible until he was stopped.
And he prepared for this. He systematically saved up his money, about $5,000 from his allowance, and gifts from his grandparents to buy his weapons.
And he bought them all legally. 3 semi-automatic pistols, a Glock 34, and 2 6-hour P226s.
And he wasn't inexperienced with them. He went to gun ranges multiple times in the months before the attack to practice to become proficient with the very weapons he planned to use for a mass murder.
And all of this physical preparation was happening at the same time as his online radicalization.
They were inseparable. He was extremely active in these online communities that we now call the manosphere. Anti-feminist forums, blogs.
It's an umbrella term, right, for all these different groups, men going their own way, pickup artists.
And the specific group he really identified with, the incels, involuntary celibates. He was a prominent voice on forums like Forever Alone and PUA Hate. And those communities didn't just validate his feelings of rejection, they gave him a formal ideology that weaponized it.
And his online posts weren't just misogynistic, they were also intensely racist.
Oh, yes. He openly mocked interracial couples. He would boast about his half-white status being superior. He wrote over and over again about his outrage that white women would choose what he called undeserving men, often non-white men, over him, the self-proclaimed supreme gentleman.
His search history really gives you a window into how deep this went.
It's a terrifying window. He was obsessed with extremist ideologies. He was researching Nazi figures like Joseph Goebbels and Heinrich Himmler, searching for things like Nazi curb stomp and Holocaust of black people.
And also searching for methods of killing. Modern torture devices, Spanish Inquisition torture, and very specific practical searches like silent killing with a knife.
So all of this online activity, it just confirmed his worldview. He started to believe that incels needed a revolution to destroy the oppressive feminist system. It hardened his resolve. It turned his fantasy into a concrete, unchangeable plan. So as the date of his planned attack gets closer, the conflicts in his immediate living situation are also escalating. In late 2013, he gets two new random roommates.
Waihan David Wang and Cheng Yuan James Hong, both 20 years old, both computer engineering students.
And the sources say the tension was there almost right away. Rodger was antisocial, complained constantly about them, especially about Hong's cooking. The conflict really blew up in January 2014 over something incredibly minor.
Some candles, right.
3 candles, valued at $22. Rodger accused Hong of stealing them. This led to a confrontation, and Rodger escalated it by calling the police and performing a citizen's arrest on his own roommate.
So Hong was arrested and charged with petty theft.
He was. And Rodger then tried to get them both evicted, emailing the building manager to complain about them. Wang and Hong, who were obviously furious about this, just signed a lease to move out as soon as they could.
But in Rodger's mind, their fate was already sealed.
He had already decided to murder them. He saw them as irritants, but also as potential obstacles who could get in the way of his day of retribution.
And this brings us to this critical moment where all the warning signs were flashing red and intervention just failed. The police welfare check on April 30th.
His mother had found one of his YouTube videos, the one titled, "Why Do Girls Hate Me So Much?"
Where he's detailing all his loneliness and frustration.
See, exactly. And she was terrified. She couldn't get in touch with him, so she contacted the authorities. A crisis hotline staffer actually requested that the sheriff's office do a mandatory welfare check, citing concerns about both self-harm and potential violence towards others.
So the police responded.
4 sheriff's deputies, a university police officer, and a trainee all went to his apartment. But Rodger was prepared. He put on a calm, composed front.
He managed to convince them it was all just a misunderstanding.
He told them the videos were just him venting about social problems. He even called his mom while they were there, told her he was fine, and had a deputy speak to her to confirm it.
And this is just, it's the critical failure point in the whole story. The deputies decided he didn't meet the legal criteria for an involuntary psychiatric hold,
which requires an imminent threat to yourself or others. They just gave him some information on local support services and left.
And the details of that failure are what's so chilling. They never went inside his apartment. They never watched the videos that his mother was so concerned about.
And they never checked their system to see if he was a registered firearm owner, which of course he was.
Rodger's own manifesto confirms how close they came to stopping it. He wrote about how relieved he was that they left without finding his guns and his detailed plans.
He said he was ready for a shootout. He had one of his loaded pistols and magazines right there, within reach, while they were talking to him at his door.
So after they left, he took some of the videos down for a little while, worried he'd raise suspicion.
But he wrote that he always intended to put them back up right before the attack. The official assessment was that he wasn't a threat. But the reality was he was armed, he was ready, and he was just counting down the days.
And so we come to May 23rd, 2014. He actually moved up his plan by one day. He'd planned for the 24th, but he was overcome by anxiety and adrenaline.
His final preparations were just as calculated as everything else. He took Xanax to calm his nerves. He looked at pornography, and then he did his last-minute research online.
Searches for how to kill someone with a knife, and quiet, silent kill with a knife.
He even practiced. He rehearsed the stabbing motions on his bedsheets and pillows before he started the first phase of his attack,
which began in his own apartment. He ambushed and killed his 2 roommates, Waihan Wang and James Hong. Both were 20 years old.
They both died from multiple stab wounds. And then he killed their friend, George Chen, who was 19 and just visiting at the time, also stabbed multiple times.
So phase 1 of his plan was complete. He was alone in the apartment with the bodies for several hours before he started the public part of the rampage.
And in that time, in that period between the stabbings and the shootings, he did one last, chillingly normal thing.
He went to Starbucks.
Drove to a Starbucks, bought a triple vanilla latte, and then went back to his apartment. The cognitive dissonance is just terrifying.
Then he sent out his final message. He emailed his 137-page manifesto to 34 people, family, therapists, acquaintances.
And at the same time, he uploaded his last video to YouTube, the one titled Elliot Rodger's Retribution, where he announced what he was about to do.
And then the war on women began. He drove his BMW to the Alpha Phi sorority house, his main target, but he couldn't get in.
The front door was locked. It was a fortunate failure. So his focus shifted immediately. He saw 3 young women walking on the street nearby, all members of the Delta sorority.
He pulled up next to them and opened fire.
2 of them died right there. Veronica Weiss, who was 19, and Catherine Katie Cooper, who was 22. The third woman was severely wounded, but she survived.
The rampage continued. He drove to a delicatessen and shot a customer inside.
That was Christopher Michaels Martinez, a 20-year-old English major. He died from a single gunshot to the chest.
After that, it just became an indiscriminate attack on anyone he saw. He was driving around Isla Vista, shooting at people, ramming them with his car.
He got into 2 separate shootouts with sheriff's deputies. He was hit in the hip, but managed to keep going for a short time.
The violence finally ended when he crashed his BMW into a parked car. When the police got to him, he was already dead.
Self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The autopsy confirmed it was suicide. In total, 6 people were murdered. 3 stabbed, 3 shot indoors, and 14 others were injured by either gunfire or by his car.
In the aftermath, in the years since the attacks, Rodger's legacy has, unfortunately and tragically, become solidified. He's a kind of toxic figurehead in these dark corners of the internet.
Specifically within the incel movement, the source material is very clear about his continued glorification in these forums. It really shows you how his act was received by that community.
They celebrate him. They call him Saint Elliot or the Supreme Gentleman. They see him as a hero who acted on their shared beliefs.
The anniversary of the attack, May 23rd, is sometimes called St. Elliot Day in those circles. They referred to him by his initials, ER. His violence became a foundational event for their movement.
And what's really critical here is that his actions, his manifesto, have been explicitly cited as a direct inspiration for other acts of mass violence.
Yes, there's a copycat effect. Other perpetrators have used the phrase going ER as a kind of shorthand for carrying out a similar misogynistic attack.
And the most direct and devastating example of this that the sources point to is the 2018 van attack in Toronto. The perpetrator was Alec Manassian.
Manassian killed 11 people and injured 15 others by driving a van down a crowded sidewalk.
And just before he did it, he posted a message on Facebook. It referenced the incel rebellion, and it specifically hailed the Supreme Gentleman, Elliot Rodger.
It's a direct line, a clear ideological transmission. It proved that Rodger's actions and his writings had provided a blueprint, a kind of validation for more extremist violence.
It just highlights this incredibly toxic feedback loop of online radicalization. You have these isolated individuals often struggling with very real mental health issues, and they find these online communities that don't just validate their worst thoughts.
They actively encourage them. They provide a perverted sense of community and belonging built on shared hatred.
And the broader societal response after Isla Vista was pretty significant. It really forced a public conversation about toxic masculinity, about gender-based violence, and about the radicalizing effect of these online echo chambers. So if we try to synthesize everything to pull the threads together, what we see is this destructive perfect storm.
It really is. You have the severe underlying mental health issues, the PDD-OS diagnosis, the acute anxiety, and you compound that with this immense social isolation.
And on top of that, this extreme weaponized sense of entitlement that seems to have come from his privileged background.
Right, and that internal struggle found a home. It found a structure and a validation in an external ideology, the manosphere, which gave him the justification for the violence he then laid out in that meticulous 137-page plan.
And the tragedy is just magnified by the fact that he was so close to being stopped. His planning, his alarming behavior, it all went undetected despite multiple points of contact with police, with counselors, and with a family that was deeply, deeply concerned.
It was this convergence of acute mental illness, this pervasive misogynistic ideology, easy access to firearms, and ultimately a systemic failure of the social and legal safety nets. It all culminated in this premeditated act of violence that took 6 innocent lives.
And you know, this case, because of how much he documented, how much he communicated his intent, it really leaves us with a profound and frankly troubling question.
It does.
When an individual's plan for a day of retribution is laid out so explicitly, both in private messages to his family and counselors and broadcast publicly online, what does that say about our ability to intervene? What does it tell us about the capability of our social and legal systems to stop this kind of violence when the path to it is being documented in the digital town square for everyone to see?
It's a systemic challenge that, society is still grappling with today.
Thanks for listening.